Hi everyone, this week we're going to be talking about APIs, which stands for Application Program Interface. Um, Actually, I'm not even going to break into another video and say like, let's get started. We can just talk about it right here because I'm prepared. All right, so let's talk about what an API is. So as I said, an API stands for Application Programming Interface. An application program interface is a set of rules that allow two systems to communicate. So, for example, in web development, we use APIs to get data from another server or to send data to another server. It's actually in a lot of the stuff that we're creating, we're more than likely going to pull data that we can use, just like in our previous class where we used JSON data to create objects. We're either going to do something like that and send it back, or we're going to manipulate data and send that back in the same way that we did before. Well, we pulled data. We didn't even pull data yet. We're going to do that this week. The other thing that APIs let us do is interact with devices. So on your phone, you have a GPS, and that's called geolocation. And so what we'll learn this week in particular is how to use that geolocation on a phone to find out where the end user is right now. Um, that's what I mean by web servers and browser features. And then, like I said, local hardware, things like the compass, things like the tilt of your phone. Like you can interact with all of that using an API in JavaScript. So this week, what we're going to focus on particularly is we're going to look at um, how we can get data, how we can pull data from another data source. We're going to look at how we can specifically get weather data. I found a really great open. I'm already jumping ahead to the end of what we're going to do this week. So let's keep talking about what an API is. Oh boy. Like I said, fetch or send data. We're going to talk about this a lot this week. The XML HTTP request object. This is an object, just like you've learned. It has methods. It has properties. And what you're going to do is you're going to instantiate this object. You're going to put a URL in. You're going to pull data. And you're going to modify it and display it on your page. So that's how that works. Fetch is the newer way to do it. We might touch on that. We're not going to use any libraries. And we are going to load weather data this week. I actually found a really great open source, open um, tool called Open Meteo, as in as in meteorology. So we'll be able to get data based off of your latitude and longitude. Um, we don't. The important thing to know is that I don't even know why I'm telling you this, but I'm telling you this because this class previously had a lot to do with APIs. But what's happened over the last 10 years of us offering this class is the standards for how communication between websites have changed. So, for example, 10 years ago, you could find an API that worked in JavaScript that could do all kinds of things. Like you could send an API maybe 3 ingredients, and it would send you back a recipe that was able to you could make with those ingredients. What's happened over time is because of monetization, and so a lot of APIs charge you, and they either flat out charge you or they charge you after so many uses. And so because of that, they have to have these things called API keys. And so if the keys are in JavaScript, as you know from the developer console, we're actually able to see code. All those keys would just be exposed. So people again don't really use that. So there's API keys. There's these things called authentication tokens. They're about the same thing. It's just a really long string of characters, uh, and we don't want them to be visible in their dev tools. We do, however, have the ability to pull them to use APIs on the server side. So if you take our IDIA 618 class, you might get experience with that kind of technology. The other thing about it is that sometimes we're going to use it more for actually getting like front end elements from our own server. So we're not going to call out necessarily in a real world situation. We might call out just to our own data server to pull down some things about a user, like if we're doing a user's page. Like for example, if a user is on their profile page, we reach out and we pull down the user's name, their um, login information, their address, their preferred image, like their avatar, all that stuff that we've reached out and pulled from our own data server. So if you are doing this kind of development, you very well may have to write API calls, but you're just not going to be doing it out to other people's servers. And there's this whole other thing that I will probably do a bonus video on about something where if I have a server over here, or I should say, there's a server over here to get data from, and I'm here, and this is like example.com, and this is ubolt.edu, and I call out to example.com might freak out and say like, hey, you're not from my own server, and block everything. So that's its own lovely pain in the butt, which we will talk about. We will talk about this geolocation API. That is where we can get the user's current location. There is a web speech API where we can convert speech to text. There is how is the device being held in your hand. There is some data that we can store on the device. So let's say we have people, instead of saving it to a server, we can save it to their own device that works whenever they're logged in. And these don't require anything special. They don't reach out to other servers. They are just built into the actual device. There's another API that's really fun. If you've ever tried to type in like you logged into a website, and then the website says, okay, get a text message. There's an API so that when you're on the text message thing where it's like now enter these 4 numbers, that it automatically fills it in for you based off of your text messages. That's an API that's built into HTML. So really what you need to know for this week and going forward, but like I said, this is one of the things that people are really going to talk to you a lot about, especially if you're working with developers or these APIs. They are powerful. They allow you to create really interesting user experiences. They can get lots of public data, I should say public things like weather, but mostly we're going to use APIs for calling our own servers as well as our own devices if we need to do that, the user's devices. And if it's gonna be sensitive or private, like we have to send data back and forth between a server and that kind of thing, we should probably be using the server side tools. And finally, if you understand where the API is, it helps you uh, respect the constraints of the phone, right? Because that's one of the crazy things that you have is you have to worry about like how strong or not strong your phone is, especially when it comes to things like geolocation. Protects user privacy because you can't just pull someone's geolocation. You have to make sure that they opt in and allow you to do that. And then there is one more thing on here that is definitely not showing up. And finally, they can work reliably. So, all right, let's get to some examples and get started.